yes, our God is a mountain mover, and we have another great example for you today. Hi there, I'm Chuck Cooper, host of It's a God Thing radio program. Thank you for tuning in today. You're going to be glad you didn't miss this one. You see, we have a very special, exciting, uninterrupted show today with limited time. So let me set the stage for you. On August 15th, 1992, at the peak of the Los Angeles rioting, Michael Carruthers, now a traveling musical evangelist based in Foley, Alabama, was returning from a nightclub engagement to his home near Bakersfield, California. Michael and his best friend Jimmy Adkisson were viciously and brutally attacked, then left for dead when they innocently drove into a raging gun battle between rival street gangs. Michael survived 8 terrible gunshot wounds. His friend Jimmy died at the scene. Here to tell his God Thing story, first in song and then in his own words, is my friend Michael Carruthers.
Late one night near the summer's end, me and Jimmy, we were best of friends. Took a ride on a country road, I couldn't let this story go untold. We finished working at a local bar where I used to sing and play guitar. Packed it up and headed home. That's when we noticed there was something going on. Squad car lights flashing red, helicopter searchlight overhead. We heard sounds and we saw lights, talking about it as we drove into the night. Within about a minute we found out what this commotion was all about. Several hundred violent men looking for blood and high on adrenaline. They just shot it out with a rival gang, and we drove up and we caught the blame for everything that drove them mad, and the torture of the spirits that told them all the glory and the honor and the riches and the power that they could have. Crumpling metal and busting glass, like the sound of a fatal car crash that shot us down. I fell to the floor and I began to pray like I never have before. Jesus Christ, save my life. Jesus Christ, save my life. Rescued me from death and darkness and set my feet on the path of life. Some men call his name in vain and some don't call at all. Some men's hearts are full of pride and headed for a fall. I know Jimmy, he believed, and even though he's gone, I know he called on Jesus, and we'll gather round the throne. Jesus Christ, save my life. Jesus Christ, save my life. Rescued me from death and darkness and set my feet
was a guy named Rodney King who was beaten by police officers, and the videotape was made by someone who happened to be standing there, and they turned it over to a media source, and then there was a giant frenzy nevertheless. The media kept on reporting this over and over and over and over till rioting finally erupted. I still thought, this is over the mountains, a couple hours away, and nothing like that's going on here. So I really never thought any such thing. At the end of that night, my friend and I packed up my stuff. I only had a couple electric guitars I'd been playing. We put those in the back of my little truck. I had a little S10 Chevy. And we took off down what we thought was the back way home into town. And we went out eastbound behind this club and took an old county road. And so we headed northbound. After we went east, we turned northbound on this old road, and we looked ahead toward the city of Bakersfield. And we could see squad car lights on the ground level, and they were turning, and we knew what they were. And we saw another light sweeping across the sky. Looked like the grand opening of a store, like when they're opening up a mall or something, and they got the big searchlight out there, and that's going back and forth. And I honestly thought that. I did when we were driving toward there. I thought, man, what in the world is that? There's no store out here. There's no mall. There's no nothing. Yet there's a searchlight. I didn't realize at the time, but it was the sheriff's helicopter, the spotlight coming off of it. We drove a little further, maybe a mile and a half further, and we were talking about that, what in the world must be going on. We weren't afraid, though, at the time. We thought, well, we're gonna come up here and see what's going on and go by while they're busy with whatever they're doing and go on home. So we got up to this place where we'd seen the lights, and we heard some noises, too, on the way. It sounded like people yelling, which really was bizarre. But we got right up to the area, and all of a sudden our focus changed, because on either side of the road were men. There was an estimated 1,500 to 2,000 of them. And in fact, one witness said 2,500. So I'm not sure the exact number, but there was a gigantic gathering of gang members. And at the time, we didn't know they were gang members. We just drove into the middle of this crowd, and they began to yell things at us as we slowed down. There were cars in front of us, and we had to slow down because of them. And meanwhile, we'd rolled our windows up tight and locked the doors and looked at each other like, oh my God, what in the world is this? And we couldn't flip a U. We couldn't turn around and go back. We were stuck in there. And we had to slow down while the traffic did. And we finally came to a stop. And there were in front of us about 6 of these guys sitting in a large older model car. And in back of us there was a van. And they boxed us in. And we just sat there. Meanwhile, we were becoming afraid for our lives definitely by then, and at one point I remember trying to back up, and I put my truck into reverse and went about a foot back, and 3 or 4 guys walked in between the van and the back of my truck, and leaving me no room to back up, or I would have squished them. And so I jammed on the brake and stopped before hitting them. And Jimmy and I sat there for a little bit longer, and I finally said, man, hang on, Bubba, we got to get out of here, man. And I turned the wheel all the way to the left and punched it and went out around this car into the oncoming lane. And then boom, man, then somebody opened fire with a .45. It was described by a sheriff's detective later. There were a cluster of holes about that big in the side of my truck, right behind where the door opened. And these went through the side of my truck and into my side, and up under my arm and through the back side of my shoulder. And the ones up under my arm and the back side of my shoulder came out the front of me. And at that time, I didn't realize I'd been shot. The impact was so great that it felt like that a car had come up when we pulled out into that lane and smashed into the side of us full speed. And that's literally what I thought. I thought we'd been wrecked into by a car going 60 up that road. I mean, I heard that metal crumple and the sound of a car wreck, and my window exploded into so many pieces it just disappeared. Flew all over in on us. And at that point, there was a guy running alongside of the truck. I was still sitting up, rolling forward, hanging onto the steering wheel. And some guy ran along there and grabbed the steering wheel and pulled it. And then we smashed into a parked car over on that same opposite side of the road. And when we hit that car, there was like just a moment of silence and then a wave of these guys come. It sounded like a battle scene from Ben-Hur or some old costume picture where they're all running to the battle. They began to jump all over the top of the truck, and they got my guitars out of the back, and they began to swing them like axes and hit them into the windshield. And the front windshield was just shattered into pieces. So many of them I couldn't see out of it. And they were jumping all over the truck. It felt like an earthquake. And at that time I had scrunched down, and I felt like a wave of hopelessness came over me like I'd never experienced in my life. I thought, this is the end of my life here, and there's no way out of this. And I began to pray out loud. And I scrunched down kind of in front of the steering wheel here and put my hands over the back of my head. And this truck was rocking, and it felt like an earthquake. And there was pounding and glass busting and smashing going on. And I'm begging the Lord to give me another chance. I said, Jesus, please, Lord God, give me another chance. Let me have a new life, and I'll serve you for the rest of it. I promise you. And I kept begging him and making these promises, and I meant it, man. I never prayed like this in my life. And I've been in some bad situations by then. I was 33 years old, and I've been through lots of things, life and death, called on the Lord a lot, but I never been to this place right here. I thought, this is it, man. My life is over with, and it seems like I'd only lived a few weeks. And it seemed like I'd wasted all of it, too. I thought about my family and about how they taught me about Jesus and about how that I knew him. But I walked away, and now this is how I was going to die. And I knew I was going to stand before him. All the sarcasm that had filled my heart and my mouth before was gone. You know, I used to say things like, hey, if God's real, then why doesn't he beam down here like a bolt of lightning and tell me then, huh? You know, I used to say stuff like that to my mom, and I used to come up with questions that were ridiculous. Can God make a rock so big he can't pick it up? You know, I mean, something just ridiculously stupid. And then scientific explanations for life and evolution. And is there really a God? Thoughts of atheism even, possibly. You know what atheism is, though? It's an intellectual tantrum, because when God doesn't unfold your life the way you think he ought to, then you say, well, there's no God then, right? Because I've been right there. I know that. So if you're an atheist and you're sitting in here, let's talk. Come and talk to me afterward, okay? Jesus is real. He's real just like we're sitting in this room right now. And every one of us, when we leave this flesh, we're going to know where we're going and who we're going to see. All of a sudden you know. I don't know how to explain it. And you also know whether your life has been treasure or trash. I felt like such a piece of filth that I couldn't stand to be before Jesus. I thought going to hell would be better. I can't put that into words. The only thing I've read close to that in the Bible is weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's how I felt right then. Like, oh my God, the thought of standing before Jesus was worse than anything. Because of my life and because of what I had done with it. Nothing. And this bashing and smashing and shooting went on, and I'm positive those guys heard me praying. They must have. I was praying out loud. And they were rotating around the truck. I read later in police interviews by witnesses. They were shifting positions and firing different types of weapons down on top of us, point blank. And I'm down there with my hands over the back of my head. At one point, I thought that a large bottle had been busted over my hands and the back of my head. I heard a pop, and I saw a flash of light right then. And I didn't realize that was a gunshot either. I somehow I couldn't believe we were being shot. I thought we were being beaten on and pelted with bottles and rocks and stuff, but this still hadn't got through to me that we were being shot. And this shot here went through my thumb, traveled all the way through my hand, and came out by my little finger here, and it was meant for the back of my head. And if it was probably a .22 or some light caliber, because if it wasn't, it would have went straight through my hand and in the back of my head where it was meant to go. And across my neck here, I got grazed. Instead of going in my neck, it just went across it. And all these holes were pumping blood, I'm sure. And these guys just continued to attack us and beat on us and shoot us. And I could hear my friend and feel him struggling over there next to me. I knew they were doing stuff to him too. And I kept thinking, I got to help Jimmy. I got to do something to help Jimmy. I got to get us out of here. But everything seemed slow motion, and like it was like a dream, like a nightmare, and it just kept going on and on and on and on. And I don't know if I was awake for the whole thing or if I passed out through part of it. I don't know that. And I don't really know how long it went on. It seemed like an eternity. And finally, though, I heard the sound of just my keys swinging in the ignition, and the truck was just rocking a little bit. But I knew those guys had gone away. There was no more sounds of the attack. And I was still scrunched down there, and I remember looking up, and I saw my keys swinging in there. And I thought, I've got to try to get us out of here again. I put my foot on the clutch and turned the key. And my truck started up, first turn. And I don't remember backing up. I just turned the wheel all the way to the right and went out from the car that we had smashed into. And then began driving down the pavement, and I couldn't even see the road. I had to stick my head out of where my window had been to see the pavement, just to stay on it. And Jimmy was just leaning back, and he was unconscious, I thought, and I kept shaking him and saying, Jimbo, wake up, man, we've been shot. Because as we were driving down that road, we're driving on 4 flat tires, bouncing down the road, and I'm trying to just stay on the pavement, and I kept shaking him and looking at him, and I could tell by the blood pouring out of me, and I could see the holes even. I knew that we had been shot by then. And I kept telling him, wake up, we've been shot, man. And I knew he had been too. And we kept driving down. We drove for 3.5 more miles. I don't know how I drove 3.5 miles. I got down to an intersection where we would have turned again and then caught another road the rest of the way into town. We got almost to this stoplight, and on the right was a store there in a dirt lot. And this woman was jumping up and down, screaming, saying, stop, I called the cops and an ambulance, and if you wait right here, they'll be here right now. And I thought, I can't trust her. For all I know, she was with these guys, or she'll tell them we're here. She must have seen what happened. I don't know where she called the cops from. But I didn't trust her. Nevertheless, my left arm was going numb, and I felt like I was going to pass out. And I remembered hearing stories about people having a heart attack or stroke, how your left arm goes numb when you're getting really bad. And I thought, man, I must be really bad. And my whole left side of my body, my chest, felt like I'd been hit with a jackhammer. I don't even know how to explain how I felt. Gunshots don't feel the way they look on the movies. And it doesn't sound that way, and cars and houses don't block bullets. They go right through like a piece of cardboard. We stopped in this lot anyway because I knew if I kept driving I was going to crash. So I pulled into that lot, and soon after that, law enforcement officers arrived. One on Jimmy's side and one on my side of the truck. The guy on my side was shining a flashlight in and asking me questions, and the other guy was looking at Jimmy, and I finally just stopped answering. I looked at the other guy and said, hey, is my friend Jimmy okay? Is he going to be all right? And the guy shined his flashlight in his face and then looked at his partner on the other side, and he didn't say anything to me. And they took Jimmy and put him in an ambulance and put me in another one, and I was on this little gurney in the back of the ambulance, and I'm praying out loud again, and I'm begging Jesus to give me another chance, telling him that I'll proclaim his name for the rest of my life and do what I knew I should have been doing anyway. And I kept praying these things out loud, and the guy that was in the back with me kept telling me, man, be quiet, just relax, be quiet. And I'd ask him, do you think I'm real bad, and he wouldn't answer me, and I'd go back to praying, and then he'd tell me to be quiet, and I'd go back to praying. And this went on all the way to the hospital. And we got into the hospital, and then I was in a hallway waiting to go into emergency, I guess. I just remember being in this hall, I guess still on that same gurney. I was up higher on a table by then, and they had wheeled me in here, and I'm out in the hall waiting to go into emergency. And I don't know how long I had to wait. It seemed like a long time, but I was very comatose by then. I remember people coming by, and they'd open one eye and look in my eye and then say something, and everything was so comatose. I don't remember what people said. I barely remember those things going on. I remember my dad coming in talking to me. My mom and dad's pastor came and prayed with me, or prayed for me. I barely remember them coming in. Immediately when I was taken into the emergency room, though, I began to wake up. There was no more comatose state because they put me on a table and strapped my arms and legs down and began to make cuts on me. And I later asked, why could I feel all these things? And they said, well, they didn't give me anesthetic because I was in shock and I was losing blood so fast. They just began cutting on me. And they cut my ankle here and put something in there for a transfusion of blood because most of the blood was pumping out of my body. And at some point, they cut my stomach open. I remember that, and they pushed something up in there. And they said that was to check for internal bleeding later. I didn't know what any of these things were they were doing at the time. And they cut my side open and pried my ribs apart and shoved a hose into my side because my left lung had collapsed. That's the thing that I remember the most. the impact of it and the pain. And right as they did that, Jesus began to speak to me. He didn't walk into the room. I didn't see his physical appearance. But he began to speak to me and tell me that he had been through these things and more. And he knew how I felt and that he was there with me. And he wasn't speaking in a judgmental tone. It wasn't like, well, here's what you get, you know. It wasn't like that at all. And he began to show me the things that he had suffered, and I began to see the things in my own body and know how they felt. You know how they say, when you're dying, your life flashes before you? Well, it does. I don't know how that happens, but thoughts are coming through 100 miles an hour, man. And your whole life is flashing before you, and you're realizing what's treasure and what's trash, and you know you're going to miss people. I knew I was going to miss my wife. My little girl was only 2. My boy wasn't even born yet. My mom and dad who taught me about Jesus my whole life. My grandma who had prayed for me for my whole life. I thought of these people. You know, you think, well, how do you have time to think of all those things? I don't know. They just came flooding in. And I thought, I'm not going to ever see them again. And I'm on this table, and all these thoughts of Jesus are flooding through my mind like that. And what he went through and what he suffered so that we could have salvation, you know, which sometimes we take for granted. Hey, what if Jesus would have said no, huh? He was a man. He could have said no. He could have said no when he was tempted in the wilderness. He could have took the deal. What if he said, all right then, hey, those kingdoms and all that fame and power sound good. Hey, I'm a man. I know what these people are like anyway. I don't want to die for them. What if he said that? What if he said it when he came to the garden and asked the Father, if you could take this cup from me, I'd appreciate it, but nevertheless, your will be done. You know, that's the only words that are written there, but I know this prayer went on for a long time, and he was agonizing because he knew what was coming next. And these thoughts are all going through my mind just over and over, and these guys they had been working on me for hours by then, I guess, and my lungs began to fill up with blood and fluid. I began to choke and feel like I was drowning, and I was gurgling and kicking on this table, and my arms and legs were still strapped down. They had run a tube down my throat by then, and I couldn't speak to them. I couldn't tell anybody that I can't breathe, help me. And I just kept kicking on this table, kicking for life, and they were scurrying around wondering what in the world was wrong with me, and this just went on for a few minutes, and I finally remember silently saying to the Lord, please forgive me of my sins, because I know I'm coming to you, Lord. And I took that last partial breath, and my lungs just filled up. And things went black then. And I never expected to live. I didn't expect to live. I begged God to let me live. I kept calling the name of Jesus. And I kept asking him to please give me another chance. But by then, I knew there were no more chances. That was it. And things went black, and that was the end of my life. It says in my medical records that they tried to resuscitate me for over 2 hours with the electric paddles. And they finally gave up with that and left me. And about 12 or 13 hours later, I don't know whether I was in the morgue or where I was when someone saw any sign of life in me. But there's only one reason why there was a sign of life in me, and I know that, and so did the doctors and people that worked on me. It was Jesus Christ, because he's the resurrection and the life. And he said, he that liveth and believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Because Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. See, life is in him. He came to give us abundant life. And he is life. And he's the life that's going to continue when this flesh dies. We're going to live for eternity. At the end of this flesh, life isn't over, one way or the other. You'll either spend the rest of eternity in the presence of the Lord or away from the presence of the Lord. That's how the fallen angels spend all of their time now. Out of the presence of the Lord, in outer darkness. And there's no provision for salvation for them at all. So don't have sympathy for the devil. When I was able to sit up and even listen to anybody, in intensive care room that I was in, About 2 or 3 days later, a team of doctors and at least one surgeon came in. And the guy that was the surgeon came up in front of the rest of them, and I wondered what in the world they were doing in my room anyway. And this guy said, we had the wrong idea about what happened out there, for whatever that's worth. I still don't know to this day everything he meant, except for I put some of the pieces together. I think that he had been told that I was a gang member and I was in a shootout and I had been shot, and I had heard them say some foul things about me and my friend Jimmy while they were working on us. And I think that's what he meant. But then he said, we don't have any idea why you're here. He said, we don't have a reason that you're alive. He said, you lost almost all the blood in your entire body, and you've still got 3 bullets inside of your chest. We don't know why you're here. He said, his comment was, somebody up there must like you.
My God is a mountain mover. My God's gonna make a way. Can't count all the times he's proven.
My goodness, if that God thing story doesn't light your fire, honey, then your wood's wet. Well, that does it for today's show. Have a God-led week. See you next time.